Second half of the NBA season kicked off with a couple of games, but the biggest news coming out of the NBA circuit yesterday was easily San Antonio Spurs head coach and the legend Greg Popovich making it known to the public that the Spurs and Lamarcus Aldridge have mutually agreed to part ways. And what does that mean? Just to be quite frank with you, that means Popovich and the Spurs organization, they're going to try their best. They got about 2-3 weeks here before the trade deadline to move Lamarcus Aldridge in a trade. The Spurs are going to try to exhaust every measure to trade Lamarcus to get some type of value back, because the Spurs did invest a lot into Lamarcus over the years. You know, they tried to bring Duncan back to the organization to coach him up. Lamarcus, you know, he's still averaging comparable stats here, 13 points a game, 4.5 rebounds a game for the Spurs. The problem with Lamarcus as of late is he hasn't been able to stay on the court. I know he had a hip injury in February. I think that cost him like 6 games. He's had some other nagging injuries over the last couple years, in which he's kind of moved to that backseat role to DeMar DeRozan and a couple other young Spurs like DeJounte Murray. They've stepped up and kind of taken over that spot as the second guy in San Antonio. I still think Lamarcus Aldridge is really good. And I'll say this again, we said this the other day with Blake Griffin. It's always tough for me to gauge what a player has left in the tank, you know, as they get over the age of 30, when there are 2 things at play. Number 1, when the person has had injuries. And number 2, when the person is playing on a team that they don't deem to be a contender. Lamarcus ain't a big talker publicly, at least. So we have not heard him speak about his frustration publicly playing in San Antonio. I think in large part out of respect for just Greg Popovich and how the Spurs do things. But let's call a spade a spade. He's clearly been frustrated in San Antonio. I think the day after he signed, he knew he made a mistake, honestly. And it showed. I think if Lamarcus had it his way, he probably would have never left Portland. Speaking of the Blazers, I want to get into them. And if we're talking about the teams that I do believe will make a run at Lamarcus, I know the Blazers are out 4-4. And man, would that make for a great ending to a story. If the Blazers are able to find a way to trade for Lamarcus, they could use a 4 and a 5 guy. Remember, Jusuf Nurkic again out for the season. They've always had injuries riddled with their big men. It seems like since Damian Lillard's got there to Portland. If Lamarcus could get back to Portland, I'm sure he's still fond of the area, right? I know obviously at some point he had to have a crib down there in Portland. That would be amazing. Another team to look out for is the Philadelphia 76ers. I know they're great. They're number 1 in the Eastern Conference right now. But I'm just thinking here, I don't think there's many people out there that genuinely believes when the playoffs start, the Sixers currently constructed will be the Kevin Durant, James Harden, Kyrie Irving led, and now Blake Griffin having Brooklyn Nets. So I think it's in the Sixers' best interest. Doc Rivers, first year as head coach. We know Doc didn't mind stacking the decks. I think it's in their best interest to go out and at least try to see what's that asking price for Lamarcus Aldridge. Because here's one thing I know about Popovich and the Spurs. They're not going to want to buy Lamarcus out of his contract. They're not going to want to do that. They'd rather get a second-round pick in 2082 before they trade or let Lamarcus Aldridge get bought out of his contract. They don't play that games because they think it sets a bad precedent. We obviously understand Popovich comes from a couple eras ago in which you play out your contract. And I know Pop for a fact doesn't like all this new talk of guys like, I don't want to play here. I don't want to be here anymore. The way Harden got out of Houston, he would have never got out of San Antonio that same way. So if this is the end of Lamarcus Aldridge in San Antonio, which according to Popovich it is, I believe the Spurs will find a way to trade Lamarcus Aldridge somewhere. Now, I think Andre Drummond of the Cavaliers, I think he'll get bought out because there's just not a lot of suitors for a guy like Drummond who's set to be a free agent in a couple of months. But a guy like Aldridge, a guy that can knock down that mid-range jumper, expand the range a little bit, a guy that's been all-star caliber in this league for many, many years. I think between the Sixers and I believe the Portland Trailblazers, either one of those teams are going to find a way to bring Lamarcus either back to Portland, or if he gets to Philly, he's going to a team that's number 1 out east right now. Catch full new episodes of FERRO's music-based platform every day only on YouTube at It's Mr.Taliaferro. You can also find clips, updates, giveaways, and more on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, also at It's Mr.Taliaferro. For all basketball fans, make sure you tune in to FERRO's daily highlights, reports, and commentary on YouTube at Hoops FERRO. and even more updates on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at FERRO as well.